The cargo hauler's airlock screamed open with a hiss of equalizing pressure, and Kira Voss felt the familiar rush of stale oxygen flooding her helmet's environmental sensors. Her pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the electric anticipation that came with every new wreck. This was it. This was the moment when junk became treasure, when yesterday's failure became tomorrow's meal ticket. She stepped through the threshold, magnetic boots clanking against the deck plating with satisfying precision. Her flashlight beam carved through the darkness like a blade through water, illuminating floating debris that sparkled like frozen stars. The ship was a Goliath-class freighter, massive and inexplicably intact. Too intact. Ships this functional didn't end up at Outpost Meridian unless someone wanted them forgotten. Young Kira's grandmother always said that the best finds came wrapped in the worst questions. She was about to prove that wisdom right. The corridor ahead hummed with residual power, live circuits, active life support. Her scanner chirped happily, displaying structural integrity readings that made her heart race faster. 92% hull integrity, full atmospheric containment. This wasn't a derelict. This was a tomb someone had sealed on purpose. She moved deeper into the vessel, her breathing steady and controlled. The thrill of exploration coursed through her veins like liquid adrenaline. Every salvager dreamed of the legendary score, the one find that changed everything. Was this it? But truthfully, before the legend began, before the galaxy learned her name, Kira Voss was just a 17-year-old girl with iridescent scales tracing her left jawline like frozen lightning, working the salvage yards of humanity's forgotten edge. Outpost Meridian wasn't a place people chose. It was where you ended up when the FTL lanes spat you out and forgot to pick you back up. A tumbling ring of recycled air and desperate hope, spinning through the void at the border between Terran space and the great unknown. 3,000 souls called it home. Most of them wished they didn't. Kira had lived here her entire conscious life, raised by her grandmother after her parents died in a shuttle malfunction when she was barely old enough to remember their faces. Gran ran Voss Reclamation, one of the few legitimate salvage operations on the station, which meant they paid taxes nobody else bothered with and operated on margins that would make an accountant weep. While other crews stripped copper from still-warm life support systems, Gran insisted on permits, safety protocols, and proper documentation. It made them poor. It made them honest. It made Kira one of the best young salvagers in 3 sectors, because Gran taught her to see ships not as scrap, but as stories waiting to be read. The scales on Kira's face caught the emergency lighting as she moved through the freighter's main corridor, glimmering with hues of copper and gold. Medical records called it a benign dermal anomaly of unknown origin. The other kids at the station academy had simpler names for it. Freak, lizard girl, half-breed. She'd stopped listening years ago. Out here, alone in the silence of a dead ship, she could be whoever she wanted. The vessel's layout matched her mental database. Standard Goliath configuration, cargo holds port and starboard, crew quarters amidships, captain's suite on the upper deck. She climbed the access ladder with practiced ease, her gear barely making a sound. The upper corridor was wider, lined with doors sealed by glowing red security locks that pulsed like warning hearts. One door drew her attention immediately. The security panel wasn't just locked, it was fortified. Military-grade magnetic seal with a biometric override. Whatever was behind that door, someone desperately wanted it to stay there. Kira pulled her grandmother's homemade electromagnetic scrambler from her utility belt. a beautiful piece of human ingenuity cobbled together from salvaged capacitors, scavenged batteries, and pure, stubborn determination. It looked like trash. It worked like magic. She pressed the contact leads against the lock panel and engaged the switch. The device whined, building charge. Sparks cascaded over her gloved hands, hot enough to feel through the insulation. The red light flickered once, twice, then died. Green light, pneumatic hiss. The door slid open. Her flashlight beam swept into the room and stopped cold. Chained in the center of the captain's quarters stood a figure that rewrote everything Kira thought she knew about the galaxy. He was massive, easily 8 feet tall even while kneeling, his frame suggesting power barely contained. Scales covered every visible inch of skin, shifting between deep burgundy and burnished copper as the light moved across them. Great wings, folded tight against his back and bound by glowing blue restraints, strained against their prison. He wore robes that screamed royalty even in ruin, purple fabric with gold embroidery that caught her flashlight beam like captured fire. But it was his face that stopped her heart, unmistakably alien, unmistakably draconic. A long snout wrapped in industrial tape, amber eyes with vertical pupils that snapped open and locked onto her with desperate intensity. The creature made a muffled sound against his gag, straining forward. The blue energy chains pulsed brighter, humming with lethal voltage, and he flinched as electricity coursed through his body. Kira's brain supplied 3 thoughts in rapid succession. First, this was absolutely beyond her clearance level. Second, Gran was going to lose her mind. Third, those glowing restraints looked like they hurt worse than anything she'd ever seen. The dragon's amber eyes went wide as her flashlight illuminated her face. He made another sound, this one different, urgent, shocked, almost reverent. His thick tail slammed against the deck plating. Once, twice, 3 times. The rhythm was deliberate, desperate. It was the sound she'd heard echoing through the ship's corridors. He'd been calling for help. Kira took a step forward, keeping her movements smooth and deliberate. "I'm going to remove that tape," she announced, trying to sound confident. Professional, like she rescued imprisoned alien nobility every other Tuesday. "If you try to eat me, my grandmother will hunt you across 3 star systems with a plasma torch. Trust me, you don't want that." The dragon went perfectly still, and he blinked slowly. Submission, understanding. She reached up, had to stand on her toes even with him kneeling, and found the edge of the industrial tape. Up close, he radiated dry heat like a fusion core at idle and smelled of crushed spices and ancient stone. She peeled the tape back in one swift motion. He gasped, his jaw unhinging to draw in a massive, shuddering breath. When he finally spoke, his voice was a geological event, deep, resonant, vibrating through Kira's chest like the engines of a capital ship coming online. "Water," he rasped. The word was barely sound. "Please, 3 days. 3 days, imprisoned, gagged, dying of thirst." Kira's hands were already moving to her canteen. Kira unscrewed her canteen with fingers that suddenly felt clumsy, hyper-aware of every movement under those amber eyes. And she held the container to the dragon's snout, tilting carefully as water poured past scaled lips. He drank like a man pulled from vacuum, desperately, gratefully, with zero dignity and complete necessity. Half the canteen disappeared in seconds. Water spilled down his chin, soaking into the ruined embroidery of his robes, and he didn't care. When he finally pulled back, panting, His eyes had regained focus, clarity, purpose. "Thank you," he said, his voice stronger now, carrying the weight of mountain ranges and orbital bombardments. "Thank you, small one. I am in your debt." He lowered his head, trying to focus on her face through what must have been days of dehydration-induced haze. The vertical pupils contracted sharply, then dilated until his eyes were almost entirely black. And he made a sound, somewhere between a gasp and a sob, that sent ice water through Kira's veins despite the heat radiating from his scales. "Your face," he whispered, and the intensity in his voice made her want to step back, to run, to be anywhere but under that stare. "Turn toward the light, please." Kira's hand moved reflexively to her cheek, covering the scales that had marked her as different for 17 years. "It's just a birthmark," she said, defensive instincts kicking in automatically. "Some kind of skin condition. Medical said it's benign. It's not contagious, or it is not a birthmark." His voice cracked like stressed hull plating. He leaned forward as far as the energy restraints would allow, the blue chains flaring brighter in warning. "Child, what is your name?" "Kira Voss." The words came out smaller than she intended. "Why are you asking me this? Who are you?" "Your parents," he pressed, ignoring her question with the single-minded focus of someone who'd spent 3 days with nothing to do but think. "Where are they?" "Dead." The word was automatic, flat. She'd said it 100 times to social workers and station administrators. "Shuttle accident when I was 2. I live with my grandmother." The dragon closed his eyes. A tear, thick and silver like liquid mercury, slid from beneath one scaled lid and traced down the side of his face, cutting a gleaming path through burgundy scales. Kira hadn't known dragons could cry, hadn't known they could look so impossibly broken. "Your mother," he said, eyes still closed as if he couldn't bear to look at her. What was her name?" Warning bells rang in Kira's head. This conversation was careening somewhere she didn't understand, picking up velocity like a ship caught in a gravity well. Ilara Voss. Why does it matter? Who are—" "My name is Thaloran Kavrex," he said, opening his eyes. The sorrow in them was vast enough to swallow solar systems. "I am the sovereign emperor of the Crimson Dominion, and I have been searching for you for 15 years. The words hung in the recycled air between them like a malfunction in the life support systems. Impossible to ignore, impossible to process. Kira blinked, waited for the punchline, waited for him to laugh at the absurdity of it. He didn't laugh. "My mother was human," Kira said slowly, carefully, like she was explaining basic physics to a malfunctioning AI. "I've seen pictures. She didn't have wings. She didn't have—" She gestured vaguely at his draconic features. "She hid them." Thaloran's voice was raw now, stripped of imperial dignity. "Just as she hid the mark. Your mother was not human, Kira, not entirely. She was my daughter, my only child. She ran away 23 years ago after we argued about her future. I wanted her to take her place in the imperial court. She wanted to explore the galaxy, to live among other species, to be free of the weight of the crown." He shifted, the chains clinking softly with the movement. "I told her if she left she would no longer be my heir. I told her she was throwing away everything our ancestors had built. I was proud, and I was stubborn, and I was catastrophically wrong." Kira sat down. Not a choice. Her legs simply stopped supporting her weight. The deck plating was cold through her suit, grounding her in physical sensation while her mind spun in freefall. "The pattern on your face," Thaloran continued, his voice gentle now despite the urgency bleeding through. "It's called the Drake Mark. It appears in every generation of my bloodline, a sign of our connection to the ancient fire spirits. My mother bore it. I bore it, though mine faded as I aged." He turned his head slightly, lifting his chin. There, beneath the burgundy scales along his jaw, Kira saw it, a faint, ghostly shimmer of gold and copper. The same pattern, the same arrangement, a mirror of the scales that traced her own face. "My daughter bore the mark in the exact pattern you carry," he said. "Exact. She used cosmetic modifications to hide it when she lived among humans, but she could never change what she was." He looked at Kira with laser focus. "You are my granddaughter. You are Crimson Dominion royalty. You are dragonborn." The silence stretched. Kira could hear her own heartbeat hammering in her ears, could feel the artificial gravity pressing down on her shoulders like the weight of revelation. "I need you to free me," Thalarin said, shifting tactics when she didn't respond. His voice became urgent but remained gentle. "The beings who captured me will return. They intended to ransom me to the Dominion Council, but I suspect they grew impatient waiting for their demands to be met. I believe they plan to leave me here to die and make it look like an accident." "Who captures an emperor?" Kira heard herself ask. Her voice sounded distant, like it was coming from someone else's body. Competitors," Thaloran said grimly. "The Keldrath Syndicate. They've wanted to destabilize the Dominion for decades. My death would trigger a succession crisis. Without an heir, the Council would fracture into factions. Civil war would follow." He paused, letting that sink in. "But I do have an heir. I have you. I'm 17, Kira pointed out, latching onto the practical because the impossible was too big to hold. "I can't even legally buy alcohol on this station." Despite everything, the chains, the pain, the 3 days of torture, Thalarin smiled. It transformed his fearsome features into something almost warm. "You saved my life. That's a promising start." Kira felt an answering smile tugging at her mouth before she could stop it. "You're surprisingly calm for someone who's been chained up for 3 days." "I am the sovereign emperor of a civilization spanning 78 star systems," Thalarin replied with a hint of dry humor that sounded eerily like her grandmother. "I've learned to maintain composure in adverse circumstances. Also, I'm fairly certain I can't feel my tail anymore, which is medically concerning." Action. Kira could do action. Action meant not thinking about feelings or heritage, or the fact that her entire understanding of her own identity had just been atomized. She scrambled to her feet and approached the glowing blue restraints. Up close, the hum was louder, a sonic itch in her teeth, a vibration that made her bones ache. What are these things? Keldrath suppression bindings, Thalarin explained. They neutralize dragonborn abilities and prevent us from generating fire. Unfortunately, they also deliver significant electrical feedback when we struggle. I've been attempting to escape for 72 hours. I do not recommend it. Kira circled him, her flashlight beam dancing over the heavy energy constructs. They weren't mechanical. They were pure directed energy, anchored by physical emitters embedded in the walls. "Every lock has a key," she muttered, more to herself than to him. "That's what Gran always says." "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman. She's going to murder me when she finds out about this." Kira located the control module embedded in the wall behind Thalarin, a sleek black box covered in symbols that looked like angry mathematics. But the principle had to be universal. Not energy flowing from a power source to the bindings. Interrupt the flow, Release the prisoner. I'm going to try something, she announced, raising her electromagnetic scrambler again. It might hurt. It cannot hurt more than the last 3 days have. Kira pressed the scrambler against the control box and turned the dial to maximum. Her grandmother had built this beauty to crack commercial-grade security systems, not alien military tech, but human ingenuity had a way of exceeding design parameters when properly motivated. "Brace yourself," she warned. She hit the activation stud. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Sparks exploded from the wall module in a shower of white-hot plasma. The lights in the room flickered wildly, strobing between darkness and blinding glare in seizure-inducing patterns. A high-pitched shriek of dying electronics filled the air like the death scream of some mechanical entity. Thalarin threw his head back and roared, a sound of pure agony that made the deck plates tremble beneath Kira's boots, that resonated in her chest cavity like the shock wave from a kinetic strike. Then, with a sound like shattering crystal, the blue chains winked out. The heavy metal emitters fell to the floor with deafening clatters that echoed through the empty ship. Thalarin pitched forward, catching himself on his hands and knees. His breathing came in ragged gasps. Slowly, agonizingly, he began to stand, and his wings unfurled. Kira gasped as the wings spread to their full span, easily 15 feet from tip to tip. Membranes of deep copper shot through with veins of living gold that pulsed with bioluminescent light. Oh, they were magnificent. They were terrifying. They filled the cramped captain's quarters like storm clouds filling a sky, displacing the stale air with a sudden gust that smelled of heated stone and distant lightning. Thalarin rolled his shoulders, a series of pops and cracks echoing through the silence as joints realigned after days of forced immobility. He stretched his neck, testing his range of motion, and the movement was serpentine, powerful and precise. He looked down at Kira, his amber eyes shining with something that might have been pride. "Well done," he breathed. "Exceptionally well done." "We need to move," Kira said, her practical nature reasserting itself over the awe trying to root her in place. "You said they might come back." "Yes, but first—" Thaloran knelt, the movement stiff and clearly painful, but deliberate. Or he brought his massive, draconic face level with hers, close enough that she could see the individual scales, could feel the heat radiating from his breath. "I need you to understand something, Kira. Whatever happens next, whether you choose to come with me or stay here, whether you want to acknowledge our connection or pretend this day never happened, I will respect your decision." His voice carried the weight of genuine conviction. "I failed your mother by trying to control her destiny. I will not make the same mistake with you." Kira looked at this creature, this dragon emperor who claimed to be her grandfather. He had silver tears drying on his scaled cheeks. He spoke to her like she was a person, not a kid, not a problem, not the freak with the weird face, but someone whose choices mattered. She'd spent 17 years being the girl who didn't quite fit anywhere. The orphan with the strange markings, the salvager's granddaughter who ate protein paste and wore patched clothes, and here was someone telling her that the thing that made her different was actually the thing that connected her to something bigger than herself. "My grandmother," Kira said firmly, surprising herself with the strength in her voice. "I'm not leaving without talking to her." "I would not dream of asking you to," Thaloran said. Getting out of the ship was harder than getting in. Thaloran was weak, his muscles atrophied from days of immobility and dehydration. Kira had to lead the way, scouting ahead with her flashlight, while the 8-foot dragon shuffled behind her, his massive wings tucked tight against his back to fit through the narrow corridors. "How did you find me?" Kira asked as they climbed over a collapsed section of bulkhead. Her voice echoed in the metal bones of the dying ship. "If you've been searching for 15 years, how did you end up here of all places?" "I hired investigators," Thalarin said, his breathing labored from the physical effort. "Dozens of them over the years. They traced your mother to the Outer Reach territories, then to a human settlement on Meridian Station, finally to a shuttle registry that listed her as a passenger on a transport bound for this sector." He paused to catch his breath, one clawed hand braced against the corridor wall. The transport never arrived. The official report said mechanical failure. No survivors. Kira stopped. She didn't turn around. "That's not what happened," she said quietly. "There was an accident, but some people survived. My mom and dad made it to an escape pod. They were picked up by a salvage ship and brought here to Meridian. But my mom, she was hurt badly. Internal injuries. She died in the station clinic 3 weeks later. Her throat felt tight, but she pushed through. My dad lasted 6 months after that. Gran said he just gave up. Said his heart stopped beating because it didn't have a reason to keep going." The silence behind her was heavy. When Thalarin finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "I should have been there. I should have found them sooner. I should have swallowed my pride and apologized while she was still alive." "What did you fight about?" Kira asked. "You said you argued." They emerged from the freighter into docking bay 17. On the vast space was filled with the skeletal remains of other ships awaiting their turn under the cutting torches. The station's artificial gravity felt heavier here, or maybe Kira was just tired. Thaloran looked around at the organized chaos of Outpost Meridian, at the rust-streaked walls and flickering overhead lights. "Your mother wanted to study xenobiology," he said. "She was fascinated by the diversity of life in the galaxy, by the ways different species had evolved and adapted. I thought it was beneath her, a princess of the Crimson Dominion grubbing around in laboratories like a common scholar." He moved slowly through the bay, each step clearly costing him. "I wanted her to learn statecraft. I wanted her to prepare for leadership. We both said things we shouldn't have. And then she was gone." He looked down at Kira with eyes that had learned wisdom too late. "I've had 23 years to understand how wrong I was. Achievement doesn't diminish based on its field. Knowledge is never beneath anyone, and forcing someone you love to become something they're not is the fastest way to lose them forever." Kira thought about her own life on Meridian, the way she disappeared into derelict ships for hours, cataloging every interesting artifact she found, the elaborate digital journal she kept filled with speculation about the cultures whose belongings passed through the station. "I want to be a xenoarchaeologist," she said. It was the first time she'd ever spoken the words out loud to anyone but Gran. "When I grow up, I want to study ancient civilizations and understand how they lived." Thalarin smiled, and the expression transformed his fearsome features into something genuinely warm. "Your mother would have loved that." They walked through the station, an odd procession of two. Kira led the way, her boots scuffing against grime-coated deck plates, while Thaloran followed, a towering figure of burgundy scales and regal bearing, trying desperately not to decapitate himself on low-hanging conduits. He'd drawn the hood of his tattered robe up to obscure his face, but there was no hiding the bulk of his wings beneath the fabric. He looked like some mythical hunchback giant from ancient Terran folklore. The main concourse was thick with foot traffic, dock workers in grease-stained coveralls, traders hawking questionable merchandise, station security pretending they didn't see the illegal gambling dens. People stopped. They stared. But on Outpost Meridian, staring was usually a prelude to either a muggin or a sales pitch, so Kira kept her eyes forward and marched with confidence she didn't entirely feel. They reached Voss Reclamation, a corrugated metal shack welded to the docking bay wall like an industrial barnacle. The sign above the door read Voss Reclamation and Salvage in letters that were mostly intact, which was better than most businesses could claim. Kira pushed the door open. The bell above it jingled, a cheerful sound that felt absurdly normal given the circumstances. Inside, the office was controlled chaos. Stacks of manifest files teetered on every surface. Spare parts, gyroscopes, intake manifolds, circuit boards served as paperweights. And there, behind a desk that looked like it had been salvaged from a prison transport, sat Gran. Nomara Voss was a compact woman, compressed by gravity and hard labor into a shape that suggested tensile strength rather than mass. Her hair was iron gray, pulled back in a strict bun, and her face was a topographical map of every bad deal and hard choice she'd survived. She was hunched over a data pad, arguing with profit margins that refused to cooperate. "Kira," she said without looking up, her voice like grinding gears, "you're late. And if you tell me you were exploring that Goliath freighter again, I'm docking your allowance for the next 6 months." "Technically," Kira said, squeezing past a stack of atmospheric filters, "I was exploring the freighter, but I found something. Unless you found a pristine hyperdrive core or a winning lottery ticket, I don't want to hear about it. I found a person." Gran finally looked up, her sharp eyes narrowing behind her reading glasses. "A person? A stowaway? Kira, I told you we don't take in strays. Call station secure." She stopped. She'd seen the figure standing in the doorway. The Lauren had lowered his hood. In the harsh fluorescent light of the office, he looked impossible. Scales catching the light like burnished metal, amber eyes glowing with inner fire, the sheer alien majesty of him making the cramped room feel like a toy box. Gran stood slowly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor, a screech of metal on metal that made Kira wince. Gran's hand drifted toward the heavy wrench she kept on her desk for aggressive negotiations, but she didn't pick it up. Her gaze locked onto the sigil embroidered on Thalarin's ruined robes, a stylized dragon wreathed in flame. "That's the Kavarek's crest," Gran whispered. The blood had drained from her face, leaving her looking suddenly shockingly old. "You recognize it," Thaloran said softly, stepping fully into the room. His head brushed the ceiling tiles. "You knew my daughter." Gran sat back down hard, as if someone had cut the strings holding her upright. "Alara," she breathed. The name hung in the air like a prayer. "You were Alara's father?" "Yes. She never told me your name." Gran's voice shook as she took off her glasses and rubbed her eyes, a gesture of profound exhaustion. "She never told me anything about where she came from, only that she couldn't go back, that it wasn't safe. She was running from me," Thalarin said, the admission clearly cost him. "From my expectations, from the life I tried to force her into. I drove her away, and I've regretted it every single day for 23 years. Gran looked at Kira, then back at the Dragon Emperor. The silence stretched, filled only by the hum of ventilation fans working overtime. She loved that girl more than anything in the galaxy. Gran said fiercely, her voice suddenly strong again. She made me promise, if anything ever happened to her, she made me swear I would raise Kira as my own, that I would never let anyone take her. Her jaw set in a hard line. She made me promise to keep her hidden. From me, specifically? Thalarin asked. From everyone. She said there were people who would want to use Kira if they knew what she was. She said the scales would mark her as valuable to the wrong kind of people. Gran let out a short, bitter laugh. I thought she was being paranoid, post-traumatic stress from the crash. But she was right, wasn't she? The Keldrath Syndicate, Thalarin confirmed. They knew. They suspected. They captured me hoping to confirm their suspicions, to determine if my granddaughter truly existed and where she might be found. I told them nothing, but they brought me here because they'd already narrowed their search. So now what? Gran demanded, standing again. Protective fury radiated off her like heat from a reactor core. Now that you've found her, you think you can just swoop in after 17 years and claim her because you share some blood? You think you can take her from the only home she's ever known? No. Thalarin's voice was firm, resonant, carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed but choosing to persuade instead. I think I can humbly request the opportunity to know my granddaughter, to share with her the heritage her mother left behind. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect immediate acceptance, but I'm asking for a chance. Kira looked between them, her grandmother, small and fierce, ready to fight a dragon emperor with a wrench if necessary, and her grandfather, a literal sovereign of 78 star systems, standing with his wings folded and his heart clearly breaking on his face. The Keldrath, Kira said, cutting through the tension like a plasma cutter through hull plating. They're still out there. They still want to destabilize the Dominion, right? Yes, Thalarin admitted, turning to her. And they know about me now, or they will, once they realize you escaped. Yes. So, whether I want to be involved or not, I already am. Kira crossed her arms, unconsciously mirroring Gran's posture. That seems like a pretty significant detail. Thaloran looked at her with something that might have been pride warming his amber eyes. You're right. I should have led with that. We need a plan, Kira said, her salvager's mind already working through the problem like it was a busted engine that needed fixing. One that doesn't involve me becoming a target and Gran spending the rest of her life looking over her shoulder. The Dominion Council can provide protection, Thaloran explained, but only if your existence is officially acknowledged, which means returning to Crimson Space and establishing your claim as my heir. She's 17, Gran shouted, her voice sharp enough to cut steel. She's not ruling anything. The claim doesn't require her to rule, Thaloran said patiently, like he'd navigated similar negotiations 1,000 times before. It requires her to exist, publicly, officially. With a confirmed heir, there's no succession crisis. Without a succession crisis, the Keldrath have no motivation to harm her. They only want me dead if it causes chaos. He spread his hands in a gesture that was surprisingly human. If Kira is known, if she's seen standing in the light where everyone can witness her, she becomes the stabilizing factor. The safest place for her isn't in shadows. It's surrounded by the Imperial Guard, acknowledged by the entire galaxy. Kira chewed her lip. It was annoyingly logical. What about Gran? She comes with us, of course. Thalarin turned to Gran, and his voice softened. As her guardian and primary family, you would be accorded the highest honors of the Imperial Court. I know I have no right to ask anything of you. You raised my granddaughter when I should have been there. You protected her mother when I drove her away." He took a breath, and Kira saw genuine humility in his posture. "But I'm asking you to let me try to make this right. Not by taking Kira from you, but by giving you both more than I can offer alone. Security, resources, a chance for Kira to learn about both sides of her heritage." Gran was quiet for a long time. Her eyes moved around the office, taking in the rust stains, the stack of unpaid invoices, the water damage on the ceiling that looked like a constellation of bad decisions. Ilara always said her father was stubborn, Gran finally said, her voice softer now. She said he would argue with a supernova if he thought it was burning at the wrong temperature. She was not wrong, Thalarin murmured. She also said, Gran's voice cracked slightly, she said he had the biggest heart of anyone she'd ever known, that the only reason he pushed so hard was because he loved so hard. Gran wiped her face with the back of her hand, a quick, efficient gesture. She said she regretted how they left things, that she wanted to go back someday. She just needed to figure out how to be herself and his daughter at the same time. Thalarin made a sound that was definitely a sob. He didn't try to hide it. I wish I could have told her that being herself was always enough. You can tell Kira instead, Gran said quietly, looking at him with eyes that had seen too much and still chose kindness. Every day, if you mean it. I do. Thalarin's voice rang with conviction. I swear, on every star and every sky, I do. Gran turned to Kira, and her expression shifted to something raw and protective and full of a love that had sustained them both through 17 years of struggle. What do you want, sweetheart? This has to be your choice. We can run. I know people in the Outer Rim. We can disappear. Or we can go with him. But you decide. Kira thought about her life on Outpost Meridian. The insults about her face, the protein-paste dinners, the feeling that she was just waiting for something to begin. She looked at the Dragon Emperor who had spent 15 years searching for her through a galaxy of infinite hiding places. I want to see where my mother came from, Kira said clearly. I want to understand what I am. And I want Gran to come with us, because family doesn't leave family behind. Thalarin smiled, and the expression seemed to light up the dingy office like a fusion reactor coming online. Then, that is what we will do. The next 48 hours were a blur that transformed Outpost Meridian from a forgotten salvage station into the center of galactic attention. Thalarin's personal guard, the Obsidian Wing, arrived in 3 sleek cruisers that made the local salvage ships look like floating scrap heaps. They docked with precision that made the station traffic controllers actually applaud. Armored soldiers with gold-visored helmets secured the bay with terrifying efficiency. The Keldrath operatives were tracked down and arrested within 6 hours. And Kira was disappointed the actual apprehension involved boring things like subpoenaed flight logs rather than dramatic firefights, but Gran seemed relieved. Gran sold Voss Reclamation to their main competitor for a sum that made her laugh hysterically for 5 minutes straight. Dragon grandfathers have their uses, she admitted to Kira while packing their belongings, but keep that scrambler. You never know. The journey to Crimson Space took 12 days aboard the Imperial flagship Worldbreaker, a vessel so massive it had its own artificial gravity generators and hydroponics gardens. The corridors were wide enough for dragons to walk 3 abreast. The air smelled of ozone and flowering gardens. The food was actual food, not reconstituted protein paste. Kira spent most of the voyage in the observation lounge, watching nebulae drift past like spilled paint across the cosmos. Thalarin was usually there, answering her endless questions with the patience of someone making up for lost time. One evening, as they watched a binary star system pulse in the distance, Thalarin turned to her. "You're magnificent, Kira. Different, but no less beautiful for it." Kira touched her cheek, the old habit resurfacing. "The kids on Meridian called me Lizard Girl." "Children can be cruel," Thalarin said, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. "Adults, too. There will be people in the Dominion who question your heritage because you don't look fully dragonborn. There will be those who doubt your worthiness because you were raised among humans." He met her eyes. "Let them doubt. You saved an emperor with nothing but courage and human ingenuity. That's more than most of them have ever accomplished." Kira grinned. "Can we put that on my official title? Kira Voss, heir to the Dominion, wielder of the electromagnetic scrambler. I'll have the Royal Heralds drafted immediately." Their arrival on Cathara, the Dominion capital world, was sensory overload. The planet was a jewel of violet oceans and emerald continents, orbited by 3 silver moons. The palace was carved from an entire mountain, an impossible architecture of spires and bridges that caught the light like frozen fire. People lined the streets as their motorcade passed. Dragonborn of every color, crimson and gold and deep azure, watched with expressions of desperate hope. "The lost princess's daughter," Thaloran murmured, waving to the crowds. Returned to claim her birthright." The official acknowledgement ceremony happened 3 days later in the Hall of Ancestors, a cathedral of floating flames and vaulted ceilings that made even Thalarin look small. The Dominion Council sat in judgment, 12 ancient dragons with scales like weathered stone. Kira stood before them in robes that Gran had modified, stitching human star charts alongside traditional dragonborn embroidery. She felt terrified. She felt small, but Gran sat in the front row wearing an expression that dared anyone to challenge her granddaughter, and that was enough. Thalarin told the council everything: his failures, his daughter's flight, the miracle in the derelict ship. Then he turned to Kira. "The choice is yours," he said. "The words must be yours. Tell them who you are." Kira stepped to the podium. She looked at the sea of faces, dignitaries and nobles and beings from 100 worlds. She thought about the little girl scrounging through trash on Meridian. She thought about her mother, dying with dreams of stars she couldn't reach. "My name is Kira Voss," she said. Her voice trembled, then steadied. "My mother was Alara Cavrex, daughter of Thalarin. My father was Marcus Voss, a human engineer who fixed broken things and told terrible jokes." She touched the scales on her face, letting them catch the light. "I was raised on a salvage station by my grandmother, who taught me that family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when the ship is sinking." She looked directly at the council leader. "I'm not fully dragonborn. I'm not fully human. I'm something new, something in between. And I think maybe that's exactly what I'm supposed to be." Silence, heavy and judgmental. Then, thump, a single foot stamping stone. Thump, thump. More joined in, building until the entire chamber shook with the dragonborn tradition of approval, a thunderous ovation that rattled her bones. Thalarin leaned down, his eyes shining. "Welcome to the family, Kira." 3 years later, the graduation hall of the Royal Academy of Xenological Studies buzzed with excited conversation. Kira stood near the stage, adjusting her sash. the Cavarex colors, burgundy and gold, with a small polished gear pinned to it. A mechanic's symbol, a salvager's pride. She was 20 now. The scales on her face had spread slightly, forming a delicate pattern that framed her eyes. She was the youngest student to earn certification in xenoarchaeology in the Academy's 800-year history. "Stop fidgeting," Gran hissed from the front row. Her hair was fully white now, but she looked more regal than half the duchesses present. She'd become a terrifying force in Dominion politics, the human grandmother with opinions on everything. Thaloran sat beside her, his scales more silver than burgundy now, but he looked happier than he had in decades. When Kira's name was called, she walked across the stage and accepted her certification scroll. She looked out at the audience and saw her family, the grandmother who saved her, the grandfather who found her. She walked to the podium. She wasn't scheduled to speak, but she was the Emperor's heir. Nobody was going to stop her. "I learned something important from a dragon in a dead spaceship," she said into the microphone. "I learned that the worst moments of our lives sometimes lead to the best ones, that salvation can come from the dark, and that the face we're most afraid to show the world might be exactly what connects us to where we belong." She smiled, and the gold scales seemed to glow with inner light. My mother thought she had to choose. She thought she had to be one thing or the other. I'm proof she was wrong. We can be everything we are, all at once, human and dragonborn, salvager and scholar. We don't have to pick a side. We just have to find the people who see all of us and love all of us. Later, after the ceremony, Thaloran found her in the palace gardens. Night had fallen, and the fireflowers were blooming, casting warm orange light over the stone paths. They stood together, looking up at unfamiliar constellations. "Your mother would have been so proud," Thaloran said quietly. "I know," Kira said. "You and Gran tell me every day." "Because it's true." Kira leaned her head against his arm, feeling the warmth of his scales. "Thank you for looking for me, for not giving up." He wrapped his wing around her, creating shelter in the vastness of the universe. "Thank you for saving me, Kira, in every way that matters." Above them, the stars of the Crimson Dominion wheeled through the endless night, and somewhere among them, Kira knew her mother was finally at peace.